Appreciate you taking the time to join this Zoom call. I trust you and yours are coping as best you can under these circumstances. Just a couple of shout outs, as Eric mentioned. Today is TJ Thompson's birthday, so happy birthday, TD. And also yesterday, I guess it was Robert Backus and David Bennett. So happy belated to you two as well. And I want to congratulate Boston Garden Society member and suite holder Paul Cormier, who was just promoted to president and CEO of Red Hat. So congratulations to you as well.
Cam, first of all, thank you for coming on here today. I hope you and yours are all doing very well. Good to see you, despite the circumstances. Take us through, it's been a while now, right? It's been over a month. Take us through a typical day for you and how you're handling things. Are you at home? Are you in the office at all? And just your daily activities.
I actually just went to the office once early in the quarantine just to grab everything I needed. I've been working from home. As you can imagine, the first couple of weeks were very hectic. The amount of conference calls and Zoom calls, I'm sure anybody that's still trying to get some work accomplished are doing the same thing, but it's really a new way of life right now of communicating to, the hockey ops group, to the scouts. They're all over the globe. But, Zoom or we use Team from the hockey ops perspective. It is a great way for us to connect, stay connected. But, the calls and Zoom meetings have kind of decreased a little bit, but I have weekly calls with the league. Monday, there's a certain group. Tuesday, there's another group. Wednesday is another group. So we're just trying to keep everybody informed as best we can and try to understand, where we're headed and what's going on from the league's perspective.
Great, thanks, Cam. Fans, just a reminder that the Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen, so please send those questions in for Cam. We have a couple that are filing in right now. Kristen Dykstra has a couple about the 2011 reunion the other night. She wants to know, did you watch it, Cam? What did you think of it? And what did that say about the special chemistry and camaraderie that group had?
I did. I had the game on. I didn't have the YouTube channel on, but I was following via social. I understand there's some colorful language. But we were excited that the players were really very interested in doing this for our fans and their fans. It was a magical ride, as we all remember. But that call, that Zoom call that all the players were on, I probably gave you some glimpse of what a locker room atmosphere may be like. It's been talked about a lot about what kind of a group that was and how special it was and what they were able to accomplish. And, those guys will be tight forever. That's what happens.
Great. And Sean Mahoney has a question about this season. He wants to know, do you have any idea of what the continuation of this year might look like?
Everything's on the table now based on the conversations I had with the league. I mean, obviously we have to wait and see what happens nationally and North America wise. I can tell you this, that both the players and ownership want to do everything possible to try and get this season completed. If that means playing into the summer, we're all willing to do that. Obviously that would mean pushing next season back a little bit, and they feel there's an opportunity to be able to push next season back and still get an 82 game schedule in the following year. So we're trying to be as patient as possible. The players are doing everything they can right now to keep themselves in as best shape as they can before, we hopefully get back to training and then some sort of training camp where they can get on the ice. But everything's on the table to try and get this season completed, which is exciting for us. I know our players are very excited about it based on, where we finished when the pause took place and the potential that our group has.
Cam, you mentioned the meetings that you guys have on a weekly basis, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just different groups meeting and talking with the league. I'm curious, how much input do they ask from the specific teams as far as, I mean, stuff that I've read where there's been a couple of teams that have had proposals where they think might work or, depending on what happens down the road, how much input do they get from you as a team or an organization?
Well, I think what happens, Beersy, is they present these ideas to us in a group, and then I think guys digest them. We talk internally, and then we'll circle back with either Gary or Bill individually as a team and kind of run through what we think are some pros and cons of some of the ideas that have been tossed out. So, but they do want it to be as a collaborative effort amongst the member clubs. They're not just saying this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to be. I mean, they do want that input from the clubs.
Great. And Bruce Friedland has a question as far as how do you think the team will respond when and if play resumes? Some think it may be a disadvantage for a team with some of the veterans like the Bruins have.
Bruce, you mean what Brad said about older teams having a problem? I don't know. I just think I just know our group, especially the veteran guys, they're so professional and they all realize that their careers are ticking down. They played more years than they have in front of them, and they see the opportunity here. So, my guess is because of the group that we have and the opportunity that's in front of us and how many years they feel they may have left to compete, they'd be ready to go.
And Scott Nodden wants to know, it seems likely that games will resume with no fans and then some and only some until there is a vaccine. Has the possibility of having rinks with maybe a quarter of the fans present been discussed?
Like I said, they've talked about everything. Playing in front of no fans, playing in front of half of a building, quarter of a building, what it would take, and obviously, not only nationally are we following what's going on nationally, but state by state there could be different restrictions. So they're looking at that. I mean, when the time comes, they're gonna, they'll certainly look at what the state restrictions are or city restrictions and see what we can do. Obviously the most fun it is to play in front of the fans, and that's what the players would prefer. But having said that, if it gets to a point where we can play hockey games without fans and get the season going, I can see the league recommending that course of action.
Cam, how much interaction have you had with, say, the coaching staff just on how to prepare? I know it's unknown. You don't know what's going to happen, but how to try to prepare and be ready when the time comes. I think I asked Bruce Cassidy just the other day, how do you try to stay kind of ahead of the curve, so to speak, if this thing comes to an end and make sure that you're absolutely ready?
One of the things I know the coaches are doing, they're all studying video of our potential, first round matchup for sure. And then they, are certainly going wider than that. But, they're looking at the teams that we could potentially play in the first round. Breaking down those videos and the games that we not only played against them, but other games that they have played in. Obviously we want to look at everybody in our division and conference. So this does give the coaching staff a little bit more time to really break down a lot of video, which they're taking advantage of.
Jeffrey Bacone is switching gears a little bit here, Cam. He wants to know, is it possible for you to pick out your most memorable game or experience as both a player and an executive?
Yeah. Well, as an executive, you guys just watched it the other night, Game 7 in Vancouver in the finals. As a player, I think, obviously we lost twice in 88 and 90 to Edmonton, but I think beating Montreal to finally get past them in the playoffs, I think it was something like 45 years. I just know what it meant to the city and meant to the organization. So that was an exciting time as a player.
And John Caneva wants to know, he's a longtime supporter of Comics Come Home as well. Nice. He says, who is your toughest opponent to fight against, and who is your favorite comedian other than Dennis and Lenny?
Toughest opponent, I mean, like Joey Kosher, I fought him and early in my career in Vancouver. Thankfully, he hit my helmet because he split my helmet right down the middle with a punch. So this guy had quite a punch that he was packing. We didn't see him that much, thankfully for me. And then as far as a comedian go, I mean, there's so many of them that have come to Comics Come Home that are fantastic. But Stephen Wright was here this past year. I think he's fantastic. You got to really pay attention to because he's very dry. So you got to pay attention to what he's saying and his sense of humor. And I love Bill Burr. I think Bill Burr's fantastic.
Cam, you said you watched the game the other night. I tried to watch as many of the games as I could, all the way through the entire playoffs. If you look back on that now, aside from winning the whole thing, I mean, what kind of stands out to you the most with that group and with the 4 rounds, going 3 game 7s and being able to win the way that you guys did?
Well, first, it's really the Montreal series, I think, how we battled back, from where we were at the start of that series. And then to your point, winning game 7s, I mean, you always look at those as maybe a coin flip, no matter where you're playing them. You're gonna go up against a goalie that could get hot, like we saw the first period of St. Louis last year. I mean, we could have easily been up 2-0 or maybe even 3-0 after that first, but just to accomplish what they did in those game 7s, and then how we regrouped in the Montreal series.
Noah Poirier wants to know when and if fans are starting to allow back into the building, will season ticket holders be the first ones back?
Absolutely. Of course.
And Anthony Marciano wants to know, due to the season pause and assuming the season resumes in full, is there any change in the player rest strategy towards the end of the season?
Well, really going to have to wait and see. This is what I've been told, that if and when we get the green light, the players will have a few days to kind of get into the facilities, work out a little bit, maybe get on the ice on their own. And then they're talking about a potential 3-week training camp, maybe a little less, for the players to really get themselves into the best of game condition they can. And then they're talking about, to finish the regular season, might take another 3 weeks. So because of the pause and what's happening with the American Hockey League, we are going to be able to have more players around, like our black aces, if you will. So we'll see how the schedule really lays out before we really can decide what we're going to do with rest and recovery. I mean, you would
following up on that, Cam, I know it's premature because we don't know what's going on, but something else that Gary Bettman had mentioned, I think it was in an interview maybe today or yesterday, he talked about the possibility, and we are getting ahead of ourselves, of using 4 arenas. And it wouldn't be college arenas, it wouldn't be minor league arenas, it would be NHL arenas. Could you envision something like that, where the players all stay in hotels and just play out of, a certain amount of teams play out of just one arena?
Yeah, I think that's going to be predicated upon, the regions and the cities and states of what the restrictions may be. And, they're going to really, if we're doing it without fans, they're going to try to make this the best TV event programming possible. And if that's the case, you might see different camera angles, because you may be able to bring the cameras down a little lower than you normally would because there's no fans in the way. So I think they're looking at, how can we bring the game on the TV a little differently than you see now. But it's not a bad idea to kind of just drop ship the teams in, keep them quarantined in hotels and bring them into games. As long as everybody's, taking care of themselves in that regard, I think it probably, gives you a little better opportunity to finish out the regular season in that respect.
Patrick McGovern wants to know, is your preference to have the draft in June, or would you rather they push it back?
Good question. I think there's, there's so many little nuances and some complications that they still have to work through, because there is a lot of trades that happen at the deadline that are contingent upon what happens with that team in the playoffs, or maybe with that player in the playoffs, could affect the draft choice. So, there's a lot of things that have to work out to be able to have the draft prior to finding out who the Stanley Cup champion is, because it could affect some of the transactions that have already taken place.
And Steven Gulikos wants to know, do you think this stoppage of play will affect the salary cap in future years, and how will that affect the flexibility of roster makeup?
Well, there's no question this is going to affect the cap for next year, and it may even affect it a little bit after that. But I think Don and our group here has done a nice job of projecting forward what we may need to do, to keep a competitive team on the ice, and being mindful of maybe a flat cap for a year or two.
Cam, if things go well, and you do get the rest of the season in, and it goes late into the summer, can you still envision, is it still a priority? I would assume it is, to try to make sure that there's an 82 game schedule next year.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. They do not want to compromise next year's schedule either, knowing that this year's already been compromised to a degree, and will look probably differently when we get up and running, possibly. But they don't want to compromise next year, but they do feel like they could start later and still not compromise the amount of games played.
Jeffrey Vacone wants to know, how is the NHL going to deal with those players that have gone home to their home countries, which may potentially have different exposure to the virus?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's thoughts of, if we get any kind of whiff of we're going to get going, to try and get those players back into North America. Obviously, they'd have to be quarantined for a couple of weeks prior to maybe getting involved with the team. So we've got to stay ahead of that.
And Dan Berard wants to know, has there been talk of changing the playoffs a bit if needed for the time compression, say a 5-game series for the first couple of rounds?
I have not heard that. I know that that's been out there in the media, but any calls that have been on with the league, they have not mentioned shortening the playoff rounds at all.
Cammy, I know you have a lot of contact with the league. Have you had contact with locally with either Mayor Walsh or Governor Baker? And if they talk to that organization, have you talked to them at all?
I talk to the mayor quite often. Actually, I spoke to him today. I talk to him on a regular basis just to get an idea of what's happening, in the city. Obviously, the city kind of follows a little, for the most part, what happens in the state. But I'm in constant contact with the mayor, more so than the governor.
Brendan McCann wants to know, any thoughts on how this might impact free agency, given that it generally starts on July 1st? And would the window for contract negotiations be expanded?
Yeah, the league right now is looking at all those, what we call critical dates. Obviously, it'll be interesting if we're playing hockey and, you don't adjust those critical dates where you could be playing, round 2 and end of July with an unrestricted free agent on your team. So, I think they've got some work to do to try to figure out the critical dates and how to adjust those properly.
And Matt Duran wants to know, with the plan to add Seattle to the league in 2021, has anything been put on hold in terms of integrating them into the league?
Not as of now. No, they waited to pick that time frame because of the CBA agreement, which now is not going to be, I don't think, an issue for Seattle coming in. The expansion draft is still supposedly moving forward when that was scheduled. So right now, I think they're really more focused on what's going to happen with the remainder of this year.
How are you guys preparing, Cam, for the upcoming draft? I know you don't know the date. I don't know that, when that's going to happen, but besides the meetings with all the scouts and things, how do you try to compile your lists doing it this way right here?
Well, it's no different. Normally, we sit in a big conference room and for 2 or 3 days, 8 hours a day, where you start by leagues, and then you try to rank everybody by the league, and then you try to put together an overall list, and you go through that. And there's always juggling going on. I mean, the list is never really finalized until you get to the draft table, and sometimes even then, you're looking at different things. Depends on who's picking in front of you and who they may have picked compared to who you have left on your list. So it hasn't really changed all that much, Bob, about getting prepared and working on the list and getting the list as tuned up as everybody feels it needs to be.
Sandy Morgan wants to know, how are the players dealing with the season coming to such a screeching halt emotionally?
I think it's very frustrating, especially when you're having a good season like us as a team, and then some of the players individually having really good years where, as a player, I would hope that most of them set individual goals as well as team goals. And I'm sure some of our guys had some individual goals that they wanted to accomplish this year. We all have a team goal that we want to accomplish, and we were tracking towards that. So in that regard, Derek, I think it's been a little disappointing for the players, but I also know that they're chomping at the bit to get back at it.
John Canavo says, the Pasta Marchand Bergeron line is amazing. What was your favorite line that you were a part of?
Well, the one that probably didn't get as much time together as I would have liked was with Adam Oates and Joe Juneau. They both were great playmakers and very smart hockey players, great hockey IQ. I would have loved to play more games together with those guys.
Cam, staying on the current team, if you would, first place overall in the NHL. You guys made a couple of deals at the deadline, trying to integrate some new players. But how would you evaluate the season overall to this point? What did you like most about the way that your team has grown together to get to where they are right now?
Well, I think we had a couple of dips, but for the most part, I thought we were fairly consistent. I thought the way we were playing at home is how we want to play at home, to try and take advantage of you great fans that are in the building that give that such a great atmosphere to play in front of. I felt like when you can really pick up some points at home where you should, it gives you an opportunity to have a strong season. So our home record, I was very happy with. Obviously, we've had a strong road record as well. I think a lot of guys take pride in picking up points on the road. And then our specialty teams have been, for the most part, fairly consistent all year. I know that there's some, throughout the course of a season, you're going to have some inconsistency, not only individually, but as a team. But I think, for the most part over this year, we've been fairly consistent, which is a sign of a strong team.
Rochelle Hellman wants to know, how would you feel if the season went right into the playoffs without any regular season or exhibition games when things resume?
I don't think that would happen. I don't think the players would welcome that at all. I think you're going to need to play. They're going to want to play some games. It would be, it's kind of no different than finishing the season. If you were going to the finals last year, getting some time, you do want to get back into some form of a camp and play some games. I would be concerned about player safety if that was the case.
Debbie McNeil asks, assuming there is a regular season next year, how do you think that would affect the Prague trip that is scheduled for the beginning of the season?
I think there's a good chance that might get postponed based on, looking at possibly playing into July, even August. And if that's the case, there's no question the season's going to get delayed a little bit the following season. So if it does get postponed, we would welcome going there the following year.
Ken, when you look at specific players this season, younger guys wise, who do you think is taking the biggest jump? Which players have taken the biggest jump this year personally?
You know, I was really anxious to see what Anders was going to do, just only because of not playing a lot of hockey the last couple of years because of injuries. You know, he's got a nice skill set for today's game. He skates really well. He sees the ice well. He just hasn't played some games, and I thought his game was starting to come along. Obviously, the consistency with Bergeron, Marchand, and Pasternak's probably taken his game to another level, both defensively and offensively. Some of the guys that we've plugged in, like Lozone, I was happy to see how he's developed for us. Clifton, he's a guy that came in and gave us some really good games. For the most part, those are the guys that really, I kind of look towards and see how they're developing because, the majority of the roster we've seen, and with Jake, I think, he's working on and he understands to be a little bit more consistent throughout the year. I mean, he's more of a streakier player, but I think if he recognizes to take that next step, he's got to be a little bit more consistent, which is something, I look for him to improve upon.
We have time for a couple more here. Cam, Tom Carey wants to know, who do you feel was the toughest goalie you faced?
I had a problem with a goalie that caught with the right hand, which was rare. So Grant Fuhr, who else? Marty Brodeur, he was very difficult. He was a good goaltender. He was hard for me to, kind of understand, pick his game a little bit apart to figure out where I could maybe get one by him. But those two guys really probably were more the tougher goalies for me to face.
And this one might be a good one to end on from Jeffrey Vacone. He wants to know, how often do you get called Seabass, and are the Fairley brothers going to be calling again anytime soon?
Every now and again, I'll hear a Seabass from across the way. It's kind of funny. I never anticipated that movie. It kind of turned out to be like the next generation Caddyshack, where people just still watch it. They'll watch it again and again and again. I don't know if they're going to be knocking on my door again. I mean, I think if acting was not really in my cards. It was fun to do, though. I have to tell you, it was a lot of fun to do.
Awesome. Great stuff, Cam. Thanks so much for taking the time. Beersy, thanks again as well. And thanks you to all of the season ticket holders for joining us today. We hope you stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you around the rink again soon.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Thank you, everybody.